Good morning, my name is Oleksandr, and I want to thank everybody who joins us in Ukraine Media Center, Ukrinform. It's July 24, it's day 516 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian aggressor, and I traditionally want to thank all the mass media who tell the world the truth about this war and our heroic resistance. Today we have invited you to discuss a very interesting topic. We will have a presentation of the guidelines for media coverage of gender equality, prevention of violence, manifestations of sexism and gender stereotypes. And I want to introduce our speakers today. They are Taras Shevchenko, Deputy Minister of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine for European Integration. Also joining us are Kateryna Levchenko, Government Commissioner for Gender Policy, Oleksandr Diachenko, Head of the Control and Analytical Department of the National Television and Radio Broadcasting Council of Ukraine. Also joining us are Liza Kuzmeko, Chair of Women in Media NGO, Tymur Levchenko, GESI Advisor for USAID, and Milena Goryachkovska, Ukrainian Women's Fund Project Coordinator. Dear friends, it's my pleasure to have all of you here. Please, Mr. Taras, can you tell us about the idea, how those guidelines have emerged, what was included in them, and how it will become a tool to help our media and journalists? Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to have this beautiful booklet containing the guidelines for media coverage of gender equality, prevention of violence, manifestations of sexism and gender stereotypes. Our ministry is responsible for implementation of the concept of gender equality concept, and together with other countries, with other government and non-government organizations, we are responsible for implementation of this strategy in the media. Well, concept strategy sometimes is difficult to tell the difference. Some may call it strategy, others concept, but anyway, that's a strategic document from the point of view of our communication of some important topic to the public. So the plan of actions contemplated a number of activities, and while planning it, we decided to publish these guidelines as one of the important components of communication on the matter of gender equality. The gender equality in media, it has a lot of aspects, and I think it may be described more by my colleagues. I would like to focus on one aspect. Apart from the coverage in the media, there is also an issue of representation of the number. For example, the female experts, the female anchors, the number of them should grow on television. It's actually not only for Ukraine, but also for the United States. Maybe 5 years ago, I remember, but within my half a year study in an American university, there was a statistics represented there, and the number of women represented in mass media was lower than the men, impressively lower. So it's important to have on the TV, among those who are asked to comment as an experts on some issues, I want the women to be represented in those crowds equally, in equal numbers as the men. The guidelines were worked on by the representatives of the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy in coordination with other organizations. We took into account the recommendations of the National Television and Broadcasting Council of Ukraine, and those who were involved in the development of these guidelines: the Center for Democratic Reforms in Media, National Broadcasting Company of Ukraine, Association of Ukrainian Lawyers Women, Volyn Press Club, Express Resource Gender in Details, Legal 100, Institute of Development of Regional Press, Campaign Against Sexism, Respect, Bureau of Gender Strategies and Budgeting, USAID Transformation Communication Activity, and they are, yeah, and the Office of the Government Commissioner. Well, that's an incomplete list, but that was a joint effort, and I hope that the result will be useful. Thank you, Ms. Kateryna. I have a question to you. As Mr. Trask has mentioned, I agree the issue of gender equality is of multi-layer nature. We're talking today about the coverage of this topic. Why is it important? How have you come up with this idea to create these guidelines? Why is it a pressing issue? Thank you for your question. Good morning, dear colleagues, those who join us in this studio and online. And answering your question, first of all, I would like to congratulate the team, the big team who was working on these guidelines, and I want to thank everybody for their input, for bringing their expertise, their knowledge, for contributing their times to this work that made it possible to create these guidelines. They are about coverage of different issues related to gender equality, and some might say that it's not such a pressing issue now. It's day 516 of the full-scale invasion. Our cities are being shelled and up under missile strikes. People keep dying. Odessa was targeted this night again, and you're dealing with something like that. But I want to say that it's still a pressing thing, because it's about all of us. It's about the people, about those who work, who defend, who suffers, and all of the people are different. And to make sure these policies are efficient, that they are aimed at the protection of the interests of our citizens, we need to take into account the specifics of different groups of population, including male and female. And it's not about the wording that is presented in the law on the ensuring the equality of male and female representatives everywhere. So it's for reasons that Mr. Taras is dealing with Euro integration matters, because those values of equality, the gender equality, are the values that we're fighting for against such a formidable adversary as Russia. So those guidelines, they are the result of implementation of the consistent government policy in this area. How is it systemic and consistent? Because it's been implemented by all the executive bodies on all levels. The Ministry of Culture and Information Policy, let me be honest, 10 years ago, it would be impossible to imagine the subjectivity of this ministry in the area of gender policy, and the changes that we are witnessing within the last years, they demonstrated how important is it to have this work done not only by the Ministry of Social Policies, not only by the Vice Prime Minister on European integration, who is the coordinator of such policy, but also any other organization within the framework of their capabilities, and it was done in a very professional manner. We have a lot of manipulations and disinformation about the gender equality policy, and these guidelines are supposed to help using those tools for the journalists, bloggers, everybody who works with the mass media and communications to counter such manipulations. They explain the terms, they explain what needs and needs not to be done, how to proceed from stereotypes to gender discrimination, which results in harm, in damage of the people, groups of people, or the society in general. And I have no doubt that these guidelines are supposed to be used for trainings, study, for sensitization of journalist community, to make sure that the new subjects, the new topics are being covered in a proper manner. Last year, due to the full-scale use of this crime, the topic of sexual violence against our citizens was actualized. And I'll give you an example. There were talks that it's only related to women. The examples of the cases of sexual violence against women were only covered. As of July 10 this year, the Office of Prosecutor General verified 212 facts of sexual violence, including 145 women who became the victims, plus 65 men and 12 children. And we cannot have this topic uncovered in a proper way, because depending on the coverage, the further process of support, of aid, is dependent. And such a sensitive information is also contained in these guidelines, and it's very good that they are not only an example of implementation of the policy on a government level, but they are also of practical nature, and they can be used in everyday life of the journalist community. Thank you very much, Mr. Oleksandr. I want to ask you, you were directly dealing with the development of these guidelines, these recommendations. It will be important for you to implement these guidelines in the media. How realistic is it, in your opinion? Good morning. I can say that the forecast is pretty optimistic. Our practice shows that the media is quite sensitive to the matter of gender balance. We know it from the year 2020. We perform systemic monitoring of gender balance in the media. We are focused on our licenses, the television and radio. Why gender monitoring? Because it's the function of the National Council to perform monitoring, and the results of monitoring, when you take apart the broadcast, when you are being shown what is wrong without any sanctions, it's way easier for the media companies to know what to rectify, what to correct, and they do it quite promptly. Because let's put it like this: the gender balance is not about implementation of European integration obligations. It's about the efficient use of human potential. And we see it way broader. It's not only about the rights of men and women, but it's about the use and eradication of harmful social stereotypes. Eradication of such stereotypes in practice means that every person who lives in this country, who got rid of the stereotypes that they cannot do something because they belong to some gender or age or other socially vulnerable category, they believe that their rights may be implemented, and they go and they realize their potential. In practice, then their goals become military. The men who could serve in the army, but they are more useful in the rear, they are not really concerned. They don't have this guilt complex. They understand exactly what they can do, and they do it where they are mostly needed. So the role of media in the eradication of these stereotypes is invaluable. These guidelines specifically are one of the aspects of the problem, and it's not less important than other harmful stereotypes. Further on, we will have more monitoring campaigns given the changes of the situation. For example, our latest monitorings demonstrated that the content changed a lot, and before the war we used under the guidelines of the gender monitoring, which was developed for the peacetime. It answered the question, what is actual now? the violence against women was one of the priorities. Now, in the turbulent media environment, different new challenges are emerging. For example, sexual violence and stereotypes against the men is growing now. So the tools will change, the tool set will change, and we develop the amendments to these guidelines, and I hope by the end of this year we will be able to perform another monitoring of our licenses. We will focus on television and we'll show what's going on with the communication of this issue in media. But again, the way of recommendations, the way of the example positively influences the media and changes their activities to the good. The feminitives are being used, editorial statutes are changed, so we were moving quite successfully before the war, and I hope that during this turbulent period, thanks to the recommendation, we will preserve this useful tendency. Thank you very much. Ms. Liza, can we get a little bit more profound in these guidelines? What is it made of? What are the indicators? What does it contain mostly? Thank you very much. I want to thank the synergy for this synergy, the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy, the Government Commissioner, National Media Regulator, civil organizations, civil media and feministic organizations, and our donor, Ukrainian Women's Fund. It was an initiative from the bottom, but it got support on all the levels, and now these guidelines are being presented in Ukrainian form. I also want to stress that such a validation meeting was before. The media representatives were gathering there, and we got a very good feedback from national broadcasting company Suspilne, who are about to implement those guidelines in their daily work. As to the content, I would like to say that in fact it's the first time in Ukraine that such national indicators of gender equality are being implemented on the level of legislation. It's something that never happened before. We also want to thank UNESCO. We were orienting at their indicators, why they are important, because they look at the media at two levels: the organizational work inside the company, inside the media and editorial, and another is the gender balance in the media content. So these guidelines are divided like this. There are indicators for the organization of the editorial and indicators for the media content. They are very practical. For example, a director of media may open page 14 and check the indicators for gender balance in the company. What is the part of the women in the company? Is there a special budget in the company aimed at the measures for countering, for example, sexism? And there is a specific section what to do with the content. And I want to also stress something that Ms. Kateryna has mentioned. There is a component covering sexual violence. It has practical recommendations which rely the global Murat Code aimed for the collectors of information about the sexual violence during the conflict. There is section 5, very short but very important. It's about the self-regulation of the gender equality in the media. We were talking about Commission of Journalist Ethics, and it's important here not to have the government come to the media and tell them how to write about the gender equality, but for the media to realize themselves how to approach this matter. The self-regulation is the key. I apologize for interrupting because we've touched upon the issue of self-regulation. Now the situation is unique. The law on media opened a possibility for the sector in regulation. What I'm actually talking about, this autumn there will be a joint coordination bodies created. Every media will have their public council, and their voice will be important for the regulator and the bodies of the joint coordination will approve the broadcasting codes, which are in fact legislation based on which the regulator will make decision whether there were violations or not. So the guidelines are only a preparation, they are fundamental, but in practice it can be implemented as a new norm, as a new standard. We have to find the most painful points, and in autumn we will have the tools implemented. Thank you very much. Ms. Milena, I would like to ask you, Ukraine Women's Fund supports such initiatives all the time, so why are these guidelines important? And maybe there are plans for development of such guidelines for other sectors. Thank you very much. I would like to start with saying that creation of this product is an intense example of the power of the expert potential of the civil society and the capability of the analytical centers of the civil society to work systemically with the government. And it's one of the examples when we see that there is like treason with the government and the civil society tries to criticize it, but no, it's a systemic collaboration, systemic teamwork on implementation of reforms that we need, that bring us closer to European Union. I'm happy that Ukrainian Women's Fund can support such initiatives with the support of European Union. There is a network of gender analytical centers which includes women in media and other civil organizations which were involved in creation of these recommendations and these guidelines. It's EURFEM, Association of Women Lawyers of Ukraine, the NGO Legal 100, the Bureau of Budget and Legal Strategies, and Consulting Women's Center. There will be more of such products, obviously, and I'm happy that this in reality is one of the first products in the network of gender analytical centers, is the first one which was published on such a high level. The project is starting, the analytical centers grow their capabilities, and it's a signal for both the government and for the civil society that there are new possibilities for cooperation. Everybody is interested in the reforms, in analytical cooperation, development of the policies. You can cooperate with the network of analytical centers, and we support it. I also want to say that in fact the sphere of application of these guidelines is way broader, because they are being developed, because what is being developed is the information campaigns both by international organizations and Ukrainian government and civil organizations in Ukraine, and all those methodic recommendations. They have practical sections that may be of use during planning of such education campaigns and communication campaigns. Ukrainian Women's Fund, with the partners in our companies, we will use these guidelines as well. And I also would like to add that there was a lot said about how actual these guidelines are, and I want to believe that not regardless the war, but specifically because the war is going on now, it's important for us to preserve our identity, to ponder over who we are, Ukrainians, both male and female, and I believe that our values are their equality, respect to human dignity. Those are the European values that we should support and develop. These guidelines is the book not only for the library, but is for the everyday use, no matter how it sounds. But I think that it's an element of our civilizational choice. We make this choice, who we are, and I think Ukraine has made its European choice long ago, but we make the choice every day. Ukraine paid with blood for their choice, and the media who issues this material and us as the readers, spectators, listeners, we make this choice: what we consume, what is the content we consume, what do we tolerate in those information communications. And I urge everybody to make a worthy choice. Thank you very much, Miss Milena, Mr. Tymur. I have a question about the role of USAID in this project. It's interesting to find out how our international partners react to such initiatives. How advanced are we in these matters? Okay, I will try to be concise, but for us the project is the project that is dealing with the communications, and for us it's important to transform them, to make them modern based on the data. So talking about these guidelines, they have a lot of references to different studies, and that's the standard that we should cherish in the media, because when we say something, we should refer to some specific information for the study, and based on that study, we identify which are the key messages that become the most efficient. This is the focus of our project. On the flip side, I have to say that Ukraine always has a positive feedback. Obviously, we have a lot of challenges in the area of gender equality, but at the same time, if we look, we mentioned 10 years ago, but if we look even deeper in history, the fact that there are guidelines developed by the Minister of Culture and Information Policy, by the Government Commissioner, the Television and Broadcasting Council, by a number of different stakeholders, and the joint guidelines, it's a story of success that will have a very positive feedback among our international partners. Thank you. Ms. Kateryna, you wanted to add something? Thank you. I unfortunately have to leave, but please, everybody who will have any questions, please ask them from Liza. She knows how to ask them from me. But what I wanted to add, very frequently when you open some analytic material, I read that the vulnerable categories include the women. This is one of the examples that we should avoid, that women are a vulnerable category that was mostly affected by the war. We should not say so. That's something that we should think about, because as a result of such wording, we distort the situation, we distort the role of women and men in the fight against the enemy, and we won't be able to find those efficient channels of support to those groups of men and women who need such support or additional attention. So please pay attention to this, because it's one of my permanent communications with many experts, both male and female, with international organizations, and I know that I always find support in the Ukrainian Women's Fund, with the Ministry of Information Policy and other government offices when we talk about this. So I will take a couple of copies with me, and I'm going to an event that we organized together with the Parliament, with the Office of Vice Prime Minister, devoted to implementation of provisions of Istanbul Convention in our legislation. Thank you, Ms. Kateryna. Thank you for taking part in our event. Mr. Taras, I think I will need to ask you, how do you plan to hand over these guidelines to the mass media? What will be communication with them? How to get them involved? Well, I have already said about this. Our main functions is the monitoring. We monitor what's going on in the screen. Again, such monitoring is already planned. The only thing we're doing is we adapt the tools of such monitoring to the conditions of the martial law. The techniques for monitoring of gender balance in mass media is on the website. There will be a similar product by the end of this year, including the things that were added by the authors, something that we wanted to add. it will be reflected there. So we'll see the picture, but about other methods of stimulation, you have to communicate with the media more and show why is it useful. Not everybody takes it into account, not everybody knows it. The practical realization of this gender policy, the gender equality in the collective, those are the characteristics that allow media businesses to encourage their investors, encourage the partners to cooperate with them. Why I segregated the practical realization and availability of policies, because practice does not always is in accord with the document, because it may say that there is a balance that should be preserved, but the head of HR may not adhere to those balance standards. We try to react to this. We perform studies. Our representatives all across Ukraine gather the questionnaires from different media. There will be a media map created, and when we understand the situation, it will be fundamental for following recommendations, how to ensure the balance, how to make sure the balance is objective, why people trust more to those media who don't only declare but who ensure the gender balance. Thank you. Mr. Truss, thank you. Monitoring of the National Council is definitely a very efficient way of communicating the recommendations. It's very practical. I think that before the monitoring there should be a communication campaign, and this event of today is a method of communication of information about this event. So I'm sure there will be a collaboration between our ministry and Commissioner for Gender Equality and other NGOs for whom this topic is the focus of their work. If it's a high quality product, it will be easier to communicate it, and additional motivation by the National Council is already here. Thank you, dear colleagues. Do we have any questions? If you have, please let me know. Please join our conversation. Well, I think we don't have any questions on the floor. I hope they will emerge as soon. Oh, we have some. Maybe they will appear upon the implementation. Well, we have questions on the floor.
Not so much a question, but my name is Teresa Korbach and I'm from UNESCO. I'm the project officer responsible for working on press freedom and safety of journalists, freedom of expression in Ukraine. And I would just like to say that we're really pleased and excited to see that you're doing this publication. It's very much in line with UNESCO's gender-sensitive indicators for media, in that it looks at these two levels, as you said, within media organizations and also the coverage. I just want to say that this is really a global issue. It's something that we see all over the world. For example, a Reuters study last year found that among 180 top editors across 240 brands in 12 markets, only 21% were women, even though 40% of the journalists were women. So this is kind of an issue that you really see on a global level. Two things I think are particularly pertinent to the current context in Ukraine, and it's great that you're picking them up in the guidelines. One is this issue which is represented in the IMI study of last year, which showed that the numbers of women experts cited in Ukrainian media was at a low since 2014. It's a mechanism that we see in conflicts, but also crises like the COVID-19 crisis around the world, that there's a reverting to traditional gender stereotypes, and it's really important to call that out to make sure that the great women experts that are here in the country, that they are visible in the media. And another element is obviously the coverage of sexual violence. We think it's really important to discuss that with Ukrainian media to make sure that there's no re-traumatization of survivors. But not to speak too long, I just wanted to congratulate the authors of the report, the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy, the Government Commissioner on Gender Policy and Women in Media. UNESCO stands ready to support any operationalization of the guidelines. We're happy to hear that Suspilne has already pledged to this if there's other media organizations we're here to support. There's a wealth of other documents that UNESCO has produced, which we're very happy to see how we can further support. So thank you very much.
Дякую дуже за ваш коментар і за вашу підтримку.
Thank you for your comment and your support. Thank you very much, dear colleagues, for today's event. I represent the Ministry of Information, the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy. And my question is, what should the ministry do better to implement the principles of GESI in our life? What additionally should we do? Who is ready to answer? I really like this question. If you ask it, it means that there is an everyday work on improvement. If there is an audit of what is done already, and based on the audit there will be more strategies developed, I think that the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy will make it. I would like to add that I became a part of this project, of the development of these recommendations, and I think it's a very positive example that other ministries can take as an interesting case, because there was a lot of actors involved and it really inspires. I was not able to imagine it like a year or 2 years ago that it can be possible. What I wanted to add is a small comment about dissemination of these guidelines. I know that we are watched online by the representatives of the civil society, so I urge you to assist to the dissemination of these guidelines. Please load them online. They're available online, so please address your local media, communicate this fact, inform them that these guidelines exist, and if you want to use these mechanisms that Oleksandr mentioned already, please become a part of civil councils to be more involved in creation of content. So by the way, where can it be downloaded? Well, even I know in the press release there is a reference, and by the way, it's a very good idea. You can take the recommendations, you can read them, you can try to implement them, and then you can monitor yourself. Like you can check yourself, and even without third parties you understand what needs to be done. I want to thank our speakers for this interesting conversation. I want to thank the representatives of all the mass media who got involved in our conversation, and obviously I want to thank our armed forces, thanks to whom we have this opportunity to hold events like this. So thank you very much, and we continue working for our victory together. Thank you very much, and glory to Ukraine.